So it's the start of a new semester, and today I want to talk about what a credit hour is and how much time you should expect to spend outside of class for every hour that you spend in class. There's a straightforward answer, but then it gets a little bit complicated. This is geared towards students at American universities, so it will vary a lot in other countries. I really only know about how it works in the United States. This will also vary a lot depending on what level you're at. For instance, I know that some of my early on, freshman and sophomore level classes were much less demanding than my senior level classes in my major or the classes that I took as a graduate student. But then those also varied from one to another. However, there's a guideline that you've probably seen that you may have even been told about by your university, and that is 2 hours outside of class for every 1 hour in class. Now, you might be wondering where this came from, and the answer is actually from the federal government. However, I think that the official definition may have changed recently, and I'm not entirely sure of that. I've been out of school for a little bit over a year now. I finished my master's degree in the spring of 2021. The most recent place that I could find that definition in anything from the federal government was in the 2020 to 2021 Federal Student Aid Handbook. The regulation that they cited was 34 CFR 668.8, sections K and L. However, when I was preparing for this video and I went to look that up, I actually found that the definition is no longer the same in there. And this is what I found in the most recent edition of the Federal Student Aid Handbook as well. However, the definition used by your college or university will most likely be more important to you as a student, and from what I found, many if not most colleges and universities do still use the 2 hours outside of class for every hour in class definition. At least all of the ones that I looked at did. So, how should you understand this as a student? Does that mean that each class will always have the same amount of outside of class work every week throughout the whole semester? Yeah, no, definitely not. That's maybe the ideal, but it certainly isn't the case in reality, and I think everybody kind of understands that it's not the case in reality. For example, finals week. You're definitely going to be doing a lot more work than average outside of class during finals week, even if you've done a good job of preparing for them. There may also be differences between classes based on your personal strengths, weaknesses, skills, and prior knowledge. If you go into a subject already knowing a lot about it and much of it is just review, then you may need to spend less time studying or working on homework than someone to whom it's all new information. There are also differences like short-term versus long-term classes. You have the 2 long semesters in the spring and the fall, but you might also have an intersession course or a summer class. Those might be 10 weeks, 8 weeks, or even as little as 3 or 4 weeks. And so, if you're cramming an entire semester's worth of work into just a couple of weeks, obviously both the in-class and outside-of-class workloads for each week are going to be significantly higher. And then there's online versus in-person. Now, if you're taking an online class where everything is totally synchronous and there's, multiple hour-long Zoom lessons each week, then it might be a little bit closer to the same balance in an in-person class. However, if you're taking an online class where everything or most things are asynchronous, then there's really no in-class versus outside of class balance because it's all outside of class and done independently. I took several classes like this in grad school, and they actually worked very well for me, but they definitely require a different set of expectations as far as the workload and how to manage your time. And then finally, just to be perfectly honest, there will be differences between different classes as well. Like, for example, as an undergrad, I was a French major and an English minor, and a lot of my 400 level classes required reading large amounts of text, and for the ones in my major, in a foreign language. It also included research projects and writing long papers. So those classes certainly took me longer each week than, say, the music appreciation class that I took, where basically the homework was studying for tests and if you wanted to listening to a playlist that the instructor provided. Now that's an extreme example as far as a class with a very light workload, but my point is that regardless of what the official guidelines either on the federal level or the institutional level are, different professors do have different expectations as far as how much work is reasonable. But this doesn't mean that the 1 hour in class for 2 hours outside of class is a bad guideline. It's just that you don't want to mistake it for meaning that every class has the same workload or that it'll be consistent throughout the semester. The way that I found it most useful to understand from a student point of view is that being a full-time college student is a full-time commitment. If you're in class for, say, 12 to 15 hours a week, that doesn't mean that you're only working on college for 12 to 15 hours a week. You actually would be doing it for 36 to 45 hours a week when you take into account the expected outside of class workload. It's essentially the equivalent of a full-time job. And that's only the average. There may be weeks that require even more work, like around finals week, for instance. So when you're thinking about taking on other commitments outside of your schoolwork, things like part-time jobs, clubs or organizations, volunteer work, those are all great things to do, don't get me wrong. But just make sure that you're still setting aside time for your schoolwork, because that is a much bigger commitment than it looks like just when you look at a 15-hour schedule.